Hello, this is Dan Pro. I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to rig a drone. So this is actually from a forum member at cgcookie.com, Jesse94. Jesse has created a rig for this drone, modeled it, and I'm just going to take this basically from step one all the way to a finished product here. Jesse was having a few problems with getting everything to move correctly, and I wanted to add some tips on bone placement just to help the animators out. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm not going to do anything with this rig. I'm just going to select a couple of these meshes and duplicate them, and then I'm just basically going to start from scratch. So with the body selected and one leg selected, Shift D to duplicate those meshes, and I'm just going to move them to a fresh layer, and I'll just enable that layer and start basically from scratch. So one of the first things I always like to do is I always place my meshes. It doesn't matter if it's a mechanical object or a creature or whatever, so the legs or whatever I'm doing is sitting on the floor in some way. So for this, obviously the body is going to be up in the air, and I'm going to want these legs to touch the floor, so I'm going to select these meshes, do G, Z, and drag these up. So this will be at the floor level. And from side view here, it looks like everything is centered there. So the other thing I want to always make sure to do is in front orthographic view, I want everything facing me, and that will help with the symmetry tools, X mirror tools, and things of that nature. So most of the things in Blender will work on the X axis, so when you center everything on there, you can actually get a lot of stuff for free if you start from that base position. The other thing this is going to do is when you bring this into another scene, ultimately the rip bone here is going to be right at the center of the scene, and when you clear everything out, everything will go to that center. So the transforms are all just going to make more sense there. So before we get to the armature though, I always like to do mesh preparation. So I'm going to start with this main body. I'm going to go into edit mode. I want to select everything, and the first thing I want to do is go to my tools panel and make sure that before I rig anything that I don't have any doubles in the mesh. So I'm going to really want to make sure that the mesh is ready for rigging. So I'm going to click remove doubles. You'll notice that 41 vertices were taken out of there. That means that there's 41 vertices that are basically duplicates of each other just sitting on top of each other. So again, we don't want all those extras, and there's a few odd vertices down here. I think we're part of the foot when this was split up into multiple meshes here, so I'm going to delete these as well. The other thing I always like to do is in the end panel you can find the normals, and if you turn this on, increase the size a little bit, I always want to make sure that all of the face normals are pointing outward. This can actually cause issues when you're using the armature modifier. If the normals are not facing outward, if they're facing inward, you can actually get weighting errors when you use auto weights. Now we're not going to use auto weights for this, but I just wanted to point that out. And the other thing is after we have checked for doubles and checked for normals and everything is ready and good that way, the other thing I want to do is set is to apply the transforms. So you'll notice that I've got odd values that are not 0 for location, and scale values where this had been scaled down quite a bit. So if I select that mesh, do Alt GRS to reset its default values, you'll notice everything is 0 for location and rotation and 111 for scale. That's not actually what we want. I'm going to back this up using Control Z. I want everything to be, I want its current position to be the default location, rotation, and scale. So I'm going to do this with Control A. I'm going to apply location, rotation, and scale, and now you'll notice all these values are zeroed out. So that is always one of the last steps. I also want to make sure that it's not parented to anything. Since I duplicated it, it was parented to that first armature. I'm going to delete that, or you can do this with Alt P, clear parent, keep transformation. And let's see, we have got an armature modifier on here that's not being used. It's red. We'll just delete that out and make sure that there's no vertex groups as well. So nothing to when we add our armature modifiers later. So we'll do the same thing with our leg mesh here. Now I'm actually not going to go all the way through this because I've actually done some manipulation of this model so I could give it a new joint down here at the foot. That was one of Jesse94's issues too, is how to rig a foot. So I'm going to add that in here, but I do want to show you the same process here. Go into edit mode, select everything, remove doubles, In this case, there was 114 vertices that were removed, and that's actually quite a bit. Let me just do Control Z to undo that, and then I want to go in and show you what a double is, and that's basically just a vertex that's sitting right on top of another one. So if I select one of these and move out of the way, there's two vertices sitting on top of each other. So basically that's what I'm trying to get rid of. Remove doubles, and then of course you want to check your normals as well, and these were all fine. When I go back to object mode, there is some odd shading, and I think the reason for that is all of these lines aren't completely straight here. So I just want to show you a quick way you can fix this. This has an armature modifier, you can delete that, and I'm going to add an edge split modifier, and that will sharpen up those edges again. So, but like I mentioned, I actually wanted to make some changes to this model, so I actually have a new leg down here that has a new joint for the foot. So I'm just going to replace this. I'm going to delete this one out and just enable this layer. So now I have one front foot. And while I've got this here, of course I have applied the transforms with Control A, so its default location rotation is set, and I am ready to add my armature and start rigging it. Actually, let me do one more thing here, because I'm going to add a mirror modifier, but I don't want a right hand leg. I'm going to uncheck X axis and have it make a rear leg instead. So basically I'm just making using these two legs here just to save myself some time when I do the rigging here. So I'll actually add, now that I've applied that, so I actually have a rear and a front mesh, I can actually add a new modifier to mirror the other four legs over here. So let's add a armature modifier. So Shift S, cursor to center to make sure your cursor is at the center of the scene. Shift A, add armature, single bone. Now I'm going to go to the side view and go into edit mode of the armature. This first bone is going to be the root bone. Now I'm going to select the tail end of it, RX negative 90, and I'm going to lay that bone down flat. Let's go to the armature panel here, and it's a man icon. You turn on axis display and X-ray as well. So now I have the axes of this bone aligned with the axes of the world. Now the reason that is important is because in the animator is always going to be animating the local transforms of these bones. So if you align them, especially when they're location controllers, with the axes of the world, they're just going to make more sense. So if I do GZ, it's obviously manipulating the Z transforms here, or GZZ to move it in the local. It's the same thing. Let me go back and show you the difference up here. So for this original one here, where this bone is pointing straight up and down, you'll notice that the y-axis is what's pointing up. So if I do GZ here, I'm moving the bone up in the world on the global z-axis, but it's the y-axis that's actually being manipulated, because the y-axis is what is currently pointing up and down with the z-axis of the world. So that's what I mean by local axes, and that is why it's important to always align these bones with the world axes whenever possible. So there's always going to be situations where it isn't possible, but whenever you can, especially if it's a location controller, always try to do that. So now we have a single bone called root. Let's go back to edit mode, and then side view again. I'm going to select the root bone, Shift D, G, Z. I'm going to drag up a new bone to be the body bone, and again, because it's aligned with the axes of the world, because I duplicated it, it's just going to make more sense for the animator. So GY, GX, it's all aligned with the world axes. Alright, now I want to go back and parent the body bone, let's name that body, to the root bone. So you always select the child first, Shift select the parent, Control P, keep offset, and now when I move that root bone, the body bone goes with it, but I can also manipulate this as well. And you also notice that the transforms, if I move the root bone, transforms are being recorded as you would expect, but the transforms of this child bone is not being manipulated until I move it. So you always, that's another thing with animation, it's always the local transforms of the bone minus its parent. So you move the parent, the child goes with it, but you're not actually recording the real world transforms. Again, it's the local transforms. So there's a couple different ways to parent meshes to an armature. when you've got a hard surface object like this main piece up here, I'm not actually going to add any bones for this other these other parts, the pincers or the antennae. So I'm just going to parent it directly to a bone, and basically you can select that, shift select the bone you want to parent it to, and the bone and the armature needs to be in pose mode for this. Control P, and you can set that parent directly to that bone, and now that mesh will rotate with that bone. It'll move wherever you move that bone, and of course that's pretty much the ultimate goal when you're rigging anyways, is to put the mesh under the control of an armature, so you can just keyframe that and move everything, and then add all your automation to those bones. So now the reason you can parent, I parent this directly to this bone, is because, like I mentioned, there's no deforming parts to this mesh. But something that we're going to run into is with these legs, for instance, is we're going to want 3 different leg sections, actually 4 with the foot. So 3 for the leg and then 1 for the foot. We want different parts of this mesh to move with different bones. So we can't directly parent. Let me go back to this original one. So if I move this, this mesh is currently parented to this bone, and that is why these other sections aren't moving, because we need to do that with an armature modifier. So let's set up our bones for that first, and then we can get into the armature modifiers later. So I'm going to tab in edit mode of the mesh, and I'm going to select this loop and make sure that do I have the doubles in here? I better check that. Oh. Weird. Alright, there we go. Shift S, cursor to selected, and that's going to put it at the average of these 4 vertices, and that's where I'm going to add my bone. So when you go to the armature in edit mode and do Shift A, it'll add a bone where the head of it is right at that 3D cursor, and the head of the bone is always where the bone rotates from, so that is always the important end. Alright, let's name this bone MCH leg .001. So I'm using MCH because this is going to be a mechanism bone. It's not something that an animator is going to use, so it kind of designates it as a bone that they should never manipulate. And I'm using .001, so when I extrude new bones from this one, it's going to be 002, 003, etc. So it's just a little easier to name things quickly. So I'm going to parent MCH leg .001 to our body, Control P, keep offset. Now I just need to set the tail position here. Now our head is where we want it at that 3D cursor. I'm going to use a 3D cursor again. I'm going to select this joint, Shift S, cursor to selected, and then I can put the tip or the tail end, Shift S, selection to cursor, right at that point. And let me take a look at our roll here. So we've got our x-axis is going to be the axis that this is going to rotate around. That works good. The z-axis is up. That looks good. Let's extrude some new bones. I'm going to do E to extrude and then GY. I'm just going to drag out a new bone, and then I'm going to tab back into edit mode of the mesh again and re-select this joint, Shift S, cursor to selected, and then I can go back to my armature, Shift S, selection to cursor, and that's going to snap that bone right at that joint. I'm going to add a new one, another joint, or another bone down here. Probably have to select these manually. Alright, so basically right at the center of that box, I'm going to bring up another bone down there and then extrude another one out that way. Shift S, cursor to selected. I'm going to select the tail end, E to extrude, G, Z, and then with that tail, Shift S, selection to cursor, and then extrude, G, Y. Now I just want to align this bone, which is going to be for the foot, with this end, Shift S, cursor to selected, then Shift S, selection to cursor, and I actually want this bone to be straight, so the head and the tail are even across the Z axis. So I'm going to select this and do Control C to copy this value on the Z axis for the head, and then Control V to paste it on the tail position. That way it will be move it up and it will be straight. So Now here's one of those instances where this is actually going to be the IK control. So this will be foot.001, and this is where I'm not going to align this, even though this is the location controller. I'm not going to align it with the world axes because I actually want it to deform this foot mesh here eventually. So I'm going to parent foot.001 to the root bone, control P, keep offset, and we have our upper leg bone parented to our body. So we've got that set up. The other thing I want to do is make sure that the axes of this bone are aligned pretty well, so they're, if I roll this back and forth, you'll notice that the x-axis is kind of cockeyed, and that's not really what I want. I actually want it to align the axis of this bone with this one. So you can do that by selecting the second bone in the chain, shift selecting this one to make it the active bone, and then control N. You can recalculate the roll based on the active bone, and that will point that x-axis the same direction as that first one. So especially when you're making a mechanical object, it's nice to have all those axes pointing the same way. Now that this one is aligned, I can do the same thing. Select this one, shift select this to make it active, the second one in the chain, control N, active bone, and that will align all of these right in a row there. And this one seems to be okay. X-axis is going the same direction, Z-axis is up. So there we go. Got all of our bones aligned properly. Now let's add our IK constraint. I'm going to do this by selecting the target, shift select the bone that's going to get the constraint. That's always the last bone. When you're adding an IK constraint, it's always the last bone in the chain it's going to affect. Shift control C, add constraints with targets, inverse kinematics. Now if we go to our constraints tab here, here's our IK constraint, and it's auto filled in that target information, foot.001. That is why we selected that first. And then this is the bone that actually got the constraint on it. Let's set our chain length to 3, because you only want that IK to work on these 3 bones in that leg. If I move that target now, those bones are going to auto rotate to try to stick to wherever I put that. So that will actually work pretty decent. Alright, next up, let's set up our axis locks here. So we actually really don't need these bones to twist back and forth on their y-axis, so I can select this bone, and bone properties, I can lock the y-axis for all 3 of these bones. And there's this is the special inverse kinematics panel where you tell it how you want those bones to act when being affected by an inverse kinematics constraint. I suppose you could actually lock Z too, but I'll just leave that open for now. Alright. Next up, I want to make the rear leg here. So I'm going to go back to edit mode, and 7 for top down view. I'm going to box select everything for this front leg. Shift S cursor to center, and then Shift D to duplicate those bones, and then RZ90. Whoops. I need to change my pivot point to 3D cursor, and then I can do RZ90. And now I have the rear legs. I kind of screwed up my bone rolls here, it looks like. So let's recalculate these. Active bone. Alright, so now I actually have 2 legs set up here. I'm going to change the name of this front foot to, or from foot to front foot, and this one to rear foot, since it's going to be a controller. Now I want to auto name everything .L. So I actually was doing this on purpose. You'll notice when I duplicated everything, for this first leg it's MCH leg.001, 2, and 3, and then when I duplicated it, it started MCH 004, 5, and 6, and that's why I changed these at the end. Alright, now I want to append .L to that, because this will be all the left side bones. Select everything from the front and rear leg. I'm going to go to Armature, auto name left and right, and you'll notice that it appended .L to everything. But now with everything still selected, I can use the Symmetrize tool, and that uses that .L convention to create R, all my right side bones. So you'll notice that this one is MCH leg.001.R, and it corresponds with 001.L on the other side. Same thing with here. This is This is 004 for L, 0046, and we've got rearfoot.R, rearfoot.L. So pretty cool, easy way to set up all those bones. Now we're going to make this mesh work with a armature modifier. Before we do that, I actually want to tell the armature which bones I want to deform our mesh. So our root bone actually is not a deformation bone. We're not going to have any vertices assigned to that, so we're going to uncheck the deform option under bone properties, and we've actually parented our main body bone to our body mesh, so that is also not going to be needed for a deformation bone. It's just these 4 bones for each leg, and they're all named properly. Now I'm going to select this leg mesh and then shift select any bone in the armature, doesn't really matter. Control P. I'm going to set parent to armature deform with empty groups. Now you don't want to do automatic weights when you're doing a hard surface model like that, because it'll well, your weighting is just going to be really off. So I'm going to use empty groups, and I'll just show you why that's the case. Empty groups, and what that did was our leg mesh is now parented to our armature. It added an armature modifier to that mesh, so I'm going to turn on preserve volume and these edit mode toggles, and also it added a vertex group for every one of these bones that has the deform option checked. So the only vertex groups that are missing are for the root and the body bone here. So if we look through, let's just sort these by name, and we won't have any groups for that. But now we need to tell, we need to add the vertices to each one of these groups. So to make the mesh move with each one, so I'm going to select this mesh, go into edit mode, make sure everything's deselected here. Why isn't that? Being kind of a pain here for some reason. Alright, I'm going to select this loop, do Control plus to add to my selection. I want all of these vertices to move with this bone, which is MCH leg.001.L. So I'm going to select this vertex group and then assign these with a weight of 1. Now let's go back to pose mode here of our armature, and those vertices are now going to move with that bone whenever that bone rotates or moves, however it does, because of parenting or directly, it's going to move those vertices. Now let me go back to edit mode again. I'm just going to hide all of these now that I've actually parent them or assigned them to a bone with H, and then I'm going to select the next group here and assign these to MCH leg.002.L. assign, hide, and I'm just going to rinse and repeat this. So these will be 003.L, assign, hide, and select one vertex, Control L to get the whole island here, and this is going to be MCH front foot.L. So I'll assign those, Alt H, unhide, and now when I move these, all of the correct vertices move and everything bends correctly. So basically we've got everything moving with the vertices are moving with the correct bone now, and it's actually working kind of as a hard surface model here, because we've only assigned those vertices to a single bone. They're not going to deform anyways, they're just going to move relative to however the bone moves. So something else that I want you to notice is the order of modifiers here is actually pretty. I've got left and right vertex groups on here, but I actually there are actually no vertices for this left side. So the mirror modifier is actually making those vertex groups. It's taking all these left side vertex groups that we've actually assigned stuff to and assigning them to the right side groups after it makes them. So hopefully that makes sense. We can actually and the reason I've got the mirror modifier on here is just so I can set up the front and rear legs, and then I'm going to apply that mirror modifier and basically get this whole side for free. So that is my goal here. And going back into edit mode, I want to select these, Control plus, and I'm going to assign these to MCH leg.004, assign, hide, rinse and repeat, 005, assign, hide. This will be 6, hide, and this foot to the rear foot.l. Alt H to unhide everything. And there we go. We should have our right and left sides should be working. Now I can actually apply this modifier here. I'm going to put it on the top of the stack. And there you go. We have a working drone rig. Now, one of the things I did not do was, of course, align these this main location controller with the axes of the world, but the reason for that was because it makes more sense to use these, let me go to individual origins, to use that as the foot control as well as a location controller. So there's always compromises when you're doing any type of rigging, so there it is. That is how you create the foot for the drone as well. And hopefully now you'll see the how to use an armature modifier to move specific parts of the mesh with different bones within the armature. So hope these tips help. Good luck.